In 1963, after 20 years of service and traveling the equivalent of 27 times around the world, HMCS Haida was decommissioned. On this Remembrance Day, we're remembering how important the Haida was, this destroyer during wartime, and we're doing that with Shayna Mercier, interpretation coordinator with the Haida. It's something to look at.
Isn't it? I'm so thankful every single day that I get to come in and see the beautiful ship. I also am just like, how do you not feel the history that comes with it, just looking at it? Like you mentioned, 20 years of service, but that's just active military service. We still continue our history even today to the present with all of the amazing stories that we get to learn every single time, right? Every single day, looking for something new.
When was it commissioned?
It was commissioned August 30th, 1943. And it was decommissioned October 11th, 1963.
And how did it end up here at Pier 8?
It ended up actually having a really fun little travel through the Great Lakes. They called it the farewell tour, really just trying to give the folks a last chance to say goodbye to such an amazing ship with all of the amazing stories that go with it, because there are a lot of really awesome stories that are connected to the ship.
So it's a destroyer.
Yep.
Okay. It was in World War II.
World War II, the Korean conflict. And the Cold War.
In the Cold War.
Yeah.
And it made it through all of those.
All of those with barely a scratch. There's actually only 2 spots on the ship that you could see some issues that arose, but she came through no problem.
Okay. How many people would be on the ship?
Believe it or not, you actually would have had quite a few men. It looks really narrow. You only have about 36 feet wide, and you would have had roughly about 250 total. Now, you would have had about 230 rank and file, and then you would have had about 14 officers serving aboard the ship.
Okay. HMCS is?
His Majesty's Canadian ship.
So it does change?
Yeah, it has, and it just changed.
Because Her Majesty, when it was commissioned, it was one of her first...
For the Korean conflict, you're right.
For the Korean conflict.
When it was refit in the 50s, had to be recommissioned into the Navy, and that was actually Queen Elizabeth II that ended up bringing her back into service.
Bringing her back. On this Remembrance Day, we think about the veterans, the ones who served, the ones who lost their lives on the Haida and all the other ships. Do we still have veterans that are connected to the ship?
We are one of few sites that are so incredibly lucky to be able to interact with veterans of not only just our ship, of serving on the Haida itself during the Korean conflict, but we also have folks coming from a vast majority of very different ships. So we get to really tell the story of not just a destroyer, but you could talk about a corvette, you could talk about literally any other type of ship.
And then taking us through and everybody at home through what it was like to be in there in wartime.
In that type of experience, and what their life was, because that ship is your home, that's your life. Those people that are on that ship, whether you like it or not, you're going to end up becoming really, really close friends. And I think it's really cool.
Do we have anybody this morning?
We do. We actually we're lucky enough to be able to have a gentleman named Andrew Barber joining us a little later. And I think everyone's going to really fall in love with him.
Okay. Look forward to that as we continue our tour of the Haida on this Remembrance Day. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
1943. That is a list of the names of the original crew on the Haida. Because on Remembrance Day, each and every year, we try to visit a different spot around the region that had significance to why we are still here in this day and age. And the Haida is definitely included in that. Moored in Hamilton at Pier 8. We've been exploring it all morning. We have something very special right now because we have a veteran of the Haida, Andy Barber.
Good morning. Sir. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you very much for coming and showing the Haida off to the rest of the Hamiltonians.
How long were you on the Haida for?
I spent close to 2 years aboard the Haida from December 53 until September 55.
Okay. What, was that the Korean War?
Korean War, yes. We went over there, we left in December to go to Korea. Arrived on station in February, and that was just shortly after the armistice had been signed. But again, as we all found out, they don't read English very well, North Koreans, and so it was always a possibility of war breaking out again. They have done it twice before. They had called for a ceasefire and armistice, and what they did was they built up their troops and ammunition and put themselves in a better position to attack us again. So when the armistice was signed, it was just people were on eggshells because they weren't sure when the other shoe was going to drop, if they were going to come back after us again. So our job was to go from island to island to make sure that there was no buildup of communist troops or equipment. And, and of course, if there was, we usually had a little Republic of Korea, a gunboat behind us, and we'd go aboard and you know, and actually pick up the people that were there, bad guys, if you want to call it that, and put them in local jail.
Where are we right now?
Where are we right now?
What room is
We are
this?
now in what they commonly call today Radio 1, but when I was aboard, we called this the Communications Center. And also because there was like three parts to it. There was actually four. There was the teletype room, which is to your right, the big room over there, and behind me over here was our coding room, our decoding room, which I did, what was part of my job. I was a visual signalman, but we also did coding and decoding of messages.
Was that something you were trained on when you arrived? You had already had that experience when you came to the Haida?
No, not. Yes, I had been trained on it, but my first experience at it would have been aboard the Haida when we were here. You know, like they usually took some of the senior hands or some of the people that were trained in it to help out. There was petty officers involved. Of course, chief petty officer, the yeoman, and there was only like 3 people really allowed in coding room at any particular time.
So there'd be 3
Well,
individuals
we're talking in there.
Right.
Yep. And by the way, that doorway wasn't here when I was on it. You came in through the passageway over here. We had our own special door.
You had your own
which was
special
locked.
door. So you would be sitting in here for how long decoding messages?
Well, it depends. When the reception came through, just as an example, the guys would be sitting here. They'd be listening in on the receivers. And when they heard our call sign CGJD, I could do it for you, but when they called our call sign, they would then put their headsets on and start typing. If it was just plain language, it was no big deal. I mean, it was just like something. But if it was a secret message, then it would come in blocks of 6 letters or numbers. And they would copy that and they'd give it to me. And I'd go in and I'd take that same information, I'd put it into my tape machine and my machine, and then I'd run a tape. But prior to that, I had to set my machine up based on a secret book that they had given me, telling me how to configure my coding machine.
Could you do, as we're going to break, because we'll come back with Andrew Barber, who is a veteran here on the Haida for the Korean War.
Would you like CHCH?
Yeah, let's see.
For CHCH.
Amazing. Could you also do the Morse code for the Haida as we go to break? Because we'll continue to tour the Haida that is here moored at Pier 8 in Hamilton. And come back on Morning Live, lest we forget. Good morning. Welcome back to the Haida. You're moored in Pier 8 in Hamilton. Happy to be joined with a veteran of the Haida, a veteran of the Korean War, Andrew Barber. Great to chat. When we were last in the Radio 1, where are we now, Andrew?
We're now was known as the Ford Weapon Mess Deck, and it was usually, this one was dedicated to the seamen aboard the ship. They had different trades, but this was a seaman's trade. This was they were. And what you're leaning on now is a mess deck table.
Okay.
And this is where we ate, slept, wrote letters home, did all our studying, played cards. Here, this was our center of social activity when we were aboard the ship, when we were not standing duty or on action stations. And what people don't realize is that this was a smoking ship. And so sometimes after supper, when the boys sat down to play cards and everything else, you couldn't probably see across the mess deck because of I'm exaggerating, but it was quite smoky. And I often said to people, it didn't bother me because I never smoked a day in my life. And they said, oh, yes, you did.
Because you took all in that smoke, but you never did smoke.
No.
How many people would be on the ship at a time?
Well, 260 roughly.
260?
Yep.
How many people would be in this mess hall at a time?
Well, it depends, because there was one, like you had 60 people would be attached to these two mess decks here, 34 in this one and 30 in the other one. Of course, there was always 1/3 would be down here, 1/3 would be up on duty.
Like that's where I was coming from, and
Exactly.
that's where you were down there.
I was down there, yeah.
So even like, where are you sleeping?
On a hammock, right across. We used to string up these hammocks.
So you used to string them up.
Yep.
Oh, like ones that are hung up in here.
That's right.
So you would put them up and then take them down every
That's
single
right.
day?
Every morning at 6:25, wakey, wakey, rise and shine.
And then did you have your own spot? You had your designated spots that you would sleep?
Yes, except if sometimes if you came home, some of the guys come back aboard ship and they were maybe half loaded and they would just grab this nearest spot they could that they were capable of hanging a makeup, and that was it.
Why does this ship mean so much to you, Andrew?
Well, first of all, it's again, it's a ship I served in the Korean War on it, and again, it's Canada's most famous warship. I consider it Canada's fighting against warship. It's the only one. There was 27 that was built, 13 were sunk, and 13 were scrapped, and this is the only one in existence in the world today. And this is why this is very, very dear to me, because I feel like an 18-year-old when I come aboard here. You know, like I've talked to all my fellow Navy guys who are volunteers that come aboard here, and they just say when they step on there, they're as straight as a rod, and they're rejuvenated. They're back to like back to the old days.
Because how old were you when you were on here?
I was actually 20 years old.
You were 20.
Yeah. When I went over to Korea, I was 20 years old.
Amazing. Well, thank you for your service.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you for the education and teaching us a little bit about the Haida and how important it is that you can experience. It's closed for the season right now, but during the summer months, this is something that you can come and you're here and you're educating and letting people know, because that's what this day is also about. Is also we remember those that we've lost. We think about those that are still serving, and we try to educate ourselves to learn more, lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Well, I hope you've been enjoying our tour of the Haida that is moored here at Pier 8 in Hamilton on this Remembrance Day. Great to be back with Shayna Mercier, who is the interpretation coordinator. How great was Andy?
Amazing, as usual. Like, it is a really wonderful experience to come to work every single day and meet folks who can give you that kind of second dimension, if you will, or third dimension of actually understanding what it's like living and breathing the ship in its truest form by serving on the ship, and all of the amazing things that they do today to help commemorate all of the folks that they've lost, all of them that they still get to talk to today, and just really continue the amazing story of this really wonderful ship.
If you missed Andy, you can follow those segments. We'll put them up online, because he's a veteran of the Haida, veteran of the Korean War, and when you say something wrong, he'll correct you, because I called it a boat. It's not a boat.
It's a warship.
It's a warship.
And we gotta call it the right thing.
Yes, and it was a destroyer, and it did do that during Second World
War, Korean War, and the Cold War.
Okay,
so lots of experience.
Where are we right now, Shayna?
We're currently looking at the 4 torpedo tubes that we have on ship, and one thing that's really amazing about these is that they're actually original from the 40s. In the 50s, our ship was refit to be a little more modernized with the times, but these are one of the items that actually stayed on the ship.
So these get open.
Yeah.
These
did you want
open
to?
up?
Let's open them up.
We can open it up.
It's very heavy, so we're gonna have to make sure that we ate our Wheaties, I hope, this morning.
Okay. Oh,
One
there we
more.
go.
One more.
Other one there.
And then we got to bring it down.
Whoa.
Perfect. There you go. So we've just done almost half of the entire loading process. We would have an entire group of people that would be working all together to lift the 3,000-pound torpedo to put it into the tube.
To put it into the tube.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a story. Is it the Athabasca?
Athabascan.
Athabascan.
HMCS.
Okay, so tell us the story about what the Haida had to do with the Athabascan.
It's a roller coaster of a story. So we're patrolling, not us, I should mention, the 10th Destroyer Flotilla. So it's not just our ship. There's actually quite a few. We're stationed in Plymouth at this time. 1944, you can imagine tensions are super, super high. Our ship, in addition to HMCS Athabascan, are out patrolling at nighttime because we're actually trying to prepare things for D-Day. And during that time, we actually noticed that there were these random blips coming up on our radar system. And those blips ended up being 2 German vessels that we did not want to interact with. Unfortunately, we ended up interacting with them, and that ended up creating an entire battle. During that little exchange between the Canadian ships and the German ships, unfortunately, HMCS Athabascan was actually hit on the port side bow, or aft, my apologies, aft so at the back of the ship,
Okay.
which is really not the best place you want to hit because that's where a lot of your ammunition is.
Right.
So that torpedo actually ended up piercing through, that exploded, that ended up exploding the magazine that was inside as well, causing a huge explosion and sadly forced the ship to sink. And if you can imagine living, breathing this entire space, like this is your home, and now you have to accept the fact that you have to abandon your home, it's pretty hard. So our ship turned around, ended up saving 42 men. We ended up shoving off a little motor cutter as well, a tiny little boat that they ended up shoving into the water to go save 6 additional men. Sadly, 127 men's lives were lost, and 85 men were actually taken prisoner by the Germans.
But that's what today is. That's
For
what
sure.
we do today. We tell these stories, we
Yeah.
educate,
Yeah.
and we think those that we lost, those that continue to serve. And the Haida is closed for the season, but next year is important because it's 80
80th
years.
year.
80 years since it was commissioned. So we'll be back to
Awesome. We
cover
can't wait to
that.
have you folks
Thanks
back.
for having us, and thanks for
Thank you
bringing
so much.
Andy on this Remembrance Day, lest we forget.